Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I was pushing the mower across the backyard, the late afternoon sun pressing warm against my neck, when I noticed her standing at the porch watching. Just standing there, arms crossed lightly, hair brushing her shoulders in a way that made the sunlight cling to every strand. I tried to focus on the grass, on the hum of the mower, but something about the way she tilted her head, the faint curve of her lips, made my hands tighten on the handle. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, the air felt heavier, like the world had shrunk to just that yard, that quiet hum, and the way she was looking at me. She didn't say anything, didn't move, but the shift in her weight, the subtle brush of her fingers along the railing, spoke volumes. My pulse thudded in my ears, or maybe it was the mower drowning everything else out. I couldn't tell. Then she stepped forward. One slow, deliberate step, and suddenly she was close enough that I could smell the faint perfume lingering in the warm breeze. My chest tightened, and I realized I hadn't breathed properly in the last few seconds. She smiled, not wide, not exaggerated, but that kind of smile that makes your stomach drop, the one that seems to know exactly what it's doing. Before I could think, or even react, her hand brushed against my arm. Light, casual, almost accidental, but not really. My skin tingled where she touched me, and I caught myself holding my breath. My eyes darted to hers, and I saw the flicker, the curiosity, the mischief, maybe even the same tension I was feeling. She leaned just a little closer so our shoulders nearly brushed. I could feel the heat from her, the slow rhythm of her breathing mingling with mine. And then, without a word, she let her hand rest lightly on my chest, right above my heart. I froze, caught between wanting to pull away and wanting to lean in. The mower hummed on, the sun dipped lower, and the silence between us thickened. Every unspoken thought hung there, heavy, impossible to ignore. And then, she whispered something, just barely audible, close enough that her lips brushed my ear, and it made me shiver. "I've been waiting for this?" And just like that, my heart jumped, and I realized, I wasn't sure if I wanted to step back or step forward. That I stepped back instinctively, but only a fraction, and she mirrored me almost perfectly, the distance between us barely a breath. The mower's hum filled the gaps in conversation, or maybe it was just my heartbeat drowning everything else out. She didn't pull her hand away. If anything, it lingered a moment longer than necessary, brushing the fabric of my shirt with a deliberate carelessness that made my chest tighten. "You always work this hard?" she asked, her voice low, teasing, almost drowning in the hum of the grass-cutting machine. I swallowed, unsure if my voice would betray me. "Yeah, I guess I like things tidy." Her lips curved in that knowing smile again. "Is that what they teach you? Or just habit?" The words weren't important. It was the way she said them, letting them hover in the space between us, heavy, warm, carrying a hint of amusement and something sharper. My eyes flicked to her hands, her posture, the slight tilt of her hip, and I realized I was studying every movement like it had a secret code I was desperate to understand. A loose strand of hair fell across her face, and I found myself wanting, without permission, to tuck it behind her ear. My fingers twitched, and I caught myself before the impulse gave me away. But she noticed anyway, that flicker of awareness in her eyes, and it made her smile widen just slightly, a spark lighting behind it. I pushed the mower forward, slow, deliberate, trying to focus on the task. But every pass brought me closer to her, closer to the warmth radiating off her body. And every glance felt stolen, heavy with something unspoken, dangerous. She stepped around, just enough to brush against me as she passed. The contact was minimal, almost accidental, but the electricity that shot through me was impossible to ignore. I could feel her fingers graze my arm again, and this time, I didn't pull away. My own hand hovered near hers, suspended in hesitation, unsure if it would be brave or foolish to make the connection. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the yard. Her voice broke the silence, softer now, almost a whisper. Do you ever get tired? Or is this just how you always feel? I swallowed, my mouth dry, but before I could answer, her gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that made my chest squeeze. I knew that whatever boundary we were dancing around was about to crumble. And then her hand moved, deliberately this time, toward mine, almost brushing my fingers, almost daring. The air thickened, and I realized, with a rush of heat, that something was about to cross the line. Her fingers brushed mine again, this time deliberately, but I didn't move. Not yet. The breeze rustled through the yard, stirring loose leaves around our feet, but inside that bubble of heat between us, nothing else existed. I could feel the weight of her gaze, heavy, knowing, almost daring me to act. My chest rose and fell faster, and I realized I was holding my breath without noticing. She leaned just slightly closer, the scent of her perfume brushing against my skin. The warmth radiating off her made it impossible to think clearly. Every step I took with the mower felt slower, almost ritualistic, as if the machine itself was part of the suspense. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The tilt of her head, the slow brush of her hand along the railing, the curve of her lips, everything screamed unspoken invitation. I felt an almost magnetic pull toward her, an ache that twisted in my stomach. My own hands twitched involuntarily, tightening around the mower's handle before releasing, as if I could will myself into control. But control was fading, slipping through my fingers like the sunlight on the grass. Her eyes lingered on mine in a way that made it impossible to look away. The briefest brush of her hand against my forearm sent a jolt of electricity up my arm, and I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the sudden tightness in my throat. Every micro-movement, the tilt of her shoulder, the sway of her stance, the way her fingers lingered on the railing, was a question and a challenge all at once. "Do you always get this close?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her smile was slow, teasing, but it didn't answer the question. Instead, she stepped just a fraction nearer, her presence crowding my space without a word. I could feel the tension building like static in the air. Her breath was faintly warm against my ear when she leaned ever so slightly forward, close enough that I could sense it, but not yet feel it fully. My heart pounded, my hands shaking slightly despite my attempts to stay steady. The boundary we were dancing around was paper-thin, and every movement threatened to tear it down. I wanted to step forward, but the danger, the delicious, terrifying tension, kept me frozen. The sun dipped lower, shadows swallowing the edges of the yard. She whispered something I didn't catch, soft enough that my pulse throbbed in my ears. Yet her eyes held mine with an intensity one couldn't ignore. And in that suspended moment, I realized. We were both teetering on the edge, waiting for something neither of us dared to name. That I froze mid-step, the mower idling, as she stepped closer, close enough that the warmth radiating off her was almost unbearable. Her hand hovered near mine for a heartbeat longer than it should have, fingers twitching like they were deciding whether to commit or retreat. Every nerve in my body screamed in response. The sun was lower now, slanting through the trees, painting gold streaks across her face. I noticed the curve of her neck, the way her hair fell over one shoulder, and my pulse jumped at the smallest detail. She leaned just enough that I could feel the faint brush of her breath, soft and deliberate, stirring a shiver down my spine. "Careful," she murmured, her voice husky, almost teasing. "I might catch you staring." Her words weren't accusatory. They were a challenge, a dare. My hands tightened on the mower as if it were a lifeline, but it did nothing to steady the heat climbing in my chest. Every glance she shot my way was loaded, heavy with meaning, with possibility. I could feel her presence pressing against mine, magnetic, dangerous, and thrilling all at once. She stepped around, fingers brushing lightly, accidentally, against my arm. The contact sent sparks through me, brief jolts that made my knees weaken slightly. Her eyes caught mine immediately afterward, holding me there as if daring me to act. And I wanted to, God, I wanted to. But there was something exquisite about the restraint, the near miss of touch that made every second stretch unbearably long. The air between us thickened, charged with tension. Every micro-movement, the way she shifted her weight, the slight parting of her lips, the brush of her hand along the railing, was an invitation and a test. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, every breath shallow, every instinct screaming that we were on the edge of something impossible. She leaned closer again, almost imperceptibly, until our shoulders nearly brushed. The electricity between us was palpable, a tangible force that made the grass, the sun, the whole backyard fade into irrelevance. My hands trembled, the mower forgotten. Her lips twitched in that sly, knowing smile, and I felt like we were both silently acknowledging that the line we'd been dancing around was no longer invisible. A faint laugh escaped her, low and dangerous, brushing my ear, and in that instant, I knew we were about to cross it. But neither of us moved. Yet that I leaned a fraction closer, drawn by a gravity I didn't want to resist. Her eyes flicked downward, then back up, locking with mine in that unspoken conversation we'd been having all afternoon. The world had shrunk to us, the hum of the mower, the golden light, the warmth radiating between our bodies. But then, just as the pull became unbearable, a sharp noise sliced through the backyard. A car door slammed across the street, loud enough to make me flinch. She startled too, stepping back slightly, her hand grazing mine for the briefest second before retreating. My pulse thundered in my ears, my chest tightening. Not from fear, but from the way the interruption had made the space between us crackle even more. We both froze, eyes darting toward the sound. Then, a familiar voice called from somewhere near the porch. "Everything okay out there?" Neither of us moved. The question lingered in the air, casual on the surface but loaded underneath. Her lips pressed together, a flicker of frustration or amusement, or maybe both, passing across her face. My hands shook slightly, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. When we finally looked at each other again, the moment hadn't vanished. It had shifted, intensified, almost feral in its restraint. She stepped closer again, shoulders brushing mine ever so lightly, her hand hovering near mine as if daring me to make the first move. I felt trapped, caught between the magnetic pull of her and the shadow of intrusion we just narrowly escaped. Her gaze fell to my lips, then back up, and I swore I could see a storm of questions, challenges, and desires flicker across her eyes. My fingers itched to close the distance, to brush away that hair falling over her cheek, to trace her skin with the tip of my hand. But the sudden reminder of the world outside that bubble of tension made it even more intoxicating. "I didn't think anyone would be home," she whispered, her breath grazing my neck. Her words were a mix of warning and promise, a dangerous invitation I could hardly resist. I wanted to speak, to say something that would anchor us to reality, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I found myself leaning slightly toward her, drawn into the orbit of her warmth, the subtle sway of her body, the faint scent of perfume and sun-warmed skin that made every rational thought vanish. And then, just when the temptation felt unbearable, a sudden rustle from the bushes behind us froze me mid-step. My heart jumped, and her hand flew to my chest, lightly pressing as if to anchor herself too. For a moment, we were caught in that precarious balance, the world threatening to intrude, yet neither of us daring to retreat. Her eyes flicked toward the sound, then back at me, wide, knowing, teasing, and the tension between us felt like it could snap at any second. Everything in me wanted to move, to give in, but the interruption had only made it more dangerous, and somehow more thrilling. The mower sat idling, forgotten, as we finally closed the last fraction of space between us. Her hand slid into mine, not cautiously, not teasingly, but with a purpose that made my chest seize. Every heartbeat felt like a drum in my ears, every breath shallow and charged, as if the sun itself had been replaced by the heat radiating between us. Her eyes never left mine, wide, daring, and intimate in a way that made me shiver. I could feel the tension that had been building for hours, days even, erupting like a storm finally unchained. The brush of her fingers against mine sent sparks up my arm, a wildfire I could no longer contain. "You," she whispered, her voice low, trembling, half commanding, half pleading. The single word held 1,000 things: desire, warning, invitation, and I didn't need more. I leaned in, and she met me halfway, our foreheads touching first, a slow, electric collision that made the world spin. Her lips hovered near mine, soft, warm, impossibly close. I could feel her breath, hear it hitch, and smell the faint perfume that had been teasing me all afternoon. The space between teasing and surrender vanished in that second, and finally, we let ourselves fall into it. My hand brushed along her waist, tentative at first, then more certain as she pressed against me. Her fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, closer still. Time seemed to stop, each second stretched, trembling with the heat of everything we'd been holding back. Our lips met, slow, deliberate, hungry, tasting the months of unspoken tension and longing. The world outside ceased to exist. Every sound, every distraction, disappeared into the background. Only her, only this, only the fire between us. And then, just as the moment felt complete, a sudden beep pierced the air. My phone, lying in the grass, vibrated insistently. We froze, breathless, pulled back just enough to see the screen, and my heart sank. A message flashed across it. "I need to talk. Now, you can't ignore this." Her hand slipped from mine, her eyes darting to mine in confusion and alarm. The storm between us hadn't ended. It had just shifted, fracturing into something urgent, dangerous, and unresolved. And in that instant, I realized nothing would ever be the same. The backyard was quiet again, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. We stood there, a fraction apart, still catching our breath, still tasting the storm that had just passed between us. The mower hummed softly in the background, a reminder of everything that had led to this. Every glance, every accidental touch, every whispered dare. She reached for my hand, slow, deliberate, as if testing whether this new closeness was real. I didn't hesitate. Our fingers intertwined, and the spark that had always simmered between us flared into something undeniable. Her smile was soft now, intimate, a private acknowledgement of the danger we'd danced around and the surrender we'd finally given in to. "I guess we should finish this," she murmured, nodding toward the mower and the remaining grass. Her voice held a playful lightness, but beneath it, there was a depth, a quiet confirmation of everything that had shifted. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I think we've got bigger things to deal with than the lawn." She tilted her head, eyes sparkling, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe," she said, her lips curving in that subtle, knowing smile that had haunted me all afternoon. We didn't speak for a long moment. The silence was different this time, not heavy or charged with restraint, but warm, intimate, like the calm after a storm. Every glance, every touch, every tiny brush of fingers spoke louder than words ever could. We'd crossed the line, yes, but in doing so we'd discovered something daring and rare, a connection that refused to be ignored. As the first stars appeared overhead, we finally stepped toward the porch, side by side. I felt her warmth against me, steady and thrilling all at once, and realized that this was only the beginning. The tension, the thrill, the closeness, it wasn't gone. It lingered, smoldering, promising more moments like this, more stolen glances, more daring brushes of skin. Her hand tightened in mine one last time. A silent challenge, a promise, and I grinned, knowing I wouldn't be able to resist it again. We didn't need words. Nothing more had to be said. And in that quiet, electric moment, it felt like we were exactly where we were meant to be. Together, for now, with a fire still burning between us.